Day. Okay, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers and all the grandmothers, especially. You know, the Gemara in Erechim, this week's parasha talks about the value of people. If you check it out. And the Gemara says, there's a very funny line. The Gemara says, Saba bebeta, paha bebeta. Savta bebeta, sima bebeta. Now, this is not Hebrew, this is Aramaic from the Talmud. It says, if there's a grandpa in the house, there's a burden in the house, aka pain in the neck. If there's a, I'm not saying this, the Gemara says this. If there's a grandma in the house, sima bebeta, treasures in the house. The Gemara says it straight out. So happy Mother's Day to the mothers and to the grandmothers as well. It couldn't be a more perfect day to celebrate mothers than the 42nd day of the Omer. Because today is the 42nd day of the Omer, and the Gematria of 42 is what? What's the value of 42? Ima. Ima is 42. So Hashem is definitely with us today on the 42nd day of the Omer. Now, people will say, you know, Mother's Day is not a Jewish holiday, and it's not a Jewish holiday. It's a non-Jewish holiday. And the non-Jews may celebrate it, and they think they're doing it well. But for Jewish people, there is no better day to celebrate than Mother's Day. It's a very Jewish idea. Why is it a very Jewish idea? Because where else do you find in the world that your entry into a club, your entry into a membership, depends only on your mother? Judaism. Your father can know the entire Bible backwards and forwards. Your father can be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. If you are not in a Jewish mom belly, the belly of a Jewish woman, you're not Jewish unless you convert. So Mother's Day for us is everything, because Judaism, it starts with a Jewish mother. We require it. You're only Jewish if your mother's Jewish. So your complete biological Jewish DNA comes from your mom. But it's not only physical, it's also your spiritual DNA. Because our moms give us, all of us, so much power spiritually that we have to recognize them for it. Now, I'll never forget, and I probably said it 100 times, Mrs. Gabay always says, the man may think he's the head, but the woman is the neck. Right? That one's going to stick with me for a while. And she could turn that head whichever way she wants. Or as my mom said, my mom's more Brooklyn, New York. Find yourself a good woman because she can make you or she can break you, as my mom used to say. Which is absolutely true. But there's something very special that the Jewish women impart, besides for the identity of being Jewish, which you need a Jewish mom for. There's something spiritual, and this is called Mesirut Nefesh. This is very unique to Jewish women. It's been this way throughout our history. Mesirut Nefesh means self-sacrifice. It means doing what needs to be done to keep this thing going forward for the next generation, to keep the tradition going. There is probably no greater reason that we're still around after all these thousands of years. Just people wandering around, guests in country that we're not welcoming. America, thank God for America. But the fact that we're here is predominantly, probably because of Mesirut Nefesh of the women. Is because no matter what, we'll do whatever it takes to get this thing going forward for the children. And Jewish women throughout history have never been afraid to stand up to the men even, to put their foot down and to say, no, we have to do this for the kids. That's a gene we get from our Jewish moms as well. It's a spiritual gene. This is a superpower. You know, you say that you're a superwoman. This is a superpower. Because you won't find anywhere on earth like the Jewish people that have time and time again been willing to put their lives on the line just for being Jewish. The Baal Tanya says something amazing. He says, it doesn't make sense. You can have a Jew, you don't have to go too far back. Go back to Poland and Germany and Russia. And they're not even observant. But when you push them too hard and you try to take everything away from them, they'll say, I'm not budging, take my life. It's part of, in Yiddish, it's called a pintel yid in Yiddish. It's called an inward something down inside your soul. It's part of our DNA. Is when you put our backs against the wall, we're not giving up. This comes from our moms, and if you're converted, you showed everyone how much you gave up to be here. So you already have that in your DNA, and you're infused with it way more when you get here. Men may have the limelight a lot of times. Men may have the spotlight many times. You know, you hear about the great rabbis, and that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, it is the women that we stand upon. Behind every great man is a great woman. The Ben Ish Chai says something very interesting. The Ben Ish Chai says, it's a pasuk in Hallel. Even ma'asu habonim, ha'ita l'rosh pina. Yeah? Even ma'asu habonim. Right? What does this mean? Even ma'asu habonim, ha'ita l'rosh pina. The literal translation of this pasuk is, Even, a stone, ma'asu habonim. The builders were like disgusted with, just a stone. Hayita l'rosh pina. But this stone became the cornerstone of the building. The founding stone, the foundation of the building, the most important stone of the building. What is this talking about? Ben Ish Chai says something so amazing. He says, Eben is talking about women. Women are the foundation. The foundation of the nation is the women. Eben are the women. Ma'asu habonim. The builders were like, they degraded the women. Who are the builders? Atikre banaich, ela bonaich. The builders, the Ben Ish Chai says, are the rabbis. The rabbis degraded the women. How did they degrade the women? Because the men every day say beracha in Bechukotai shelo asani isha. The rabbis told us to make a beracha. The men, we say every day, thank you Hashem for not making me a woman. Now why do we say this beracha? It's not because the rabbis are anti-feminine. It's not at all the reason. I know I owe all of you a class. You've asked me many times for women in prayer class, which we owe you. But just very briefly, the reason why we say this beracha is simply because by being men, our unique job is to do more mitzvot. That's it. And we're happy to do more things Hashem told us. It's not about being better or worse. But since this beracha makes the women feel bad, it can make a woman feel bad if she doesn't understand it. Ben Ish Chai says, Even ma'asu habonim. The women, the rocks, the bonim, the rabbis have degraded. She's going to be the cornerstone of the building, the foundation. In other words, the women get the last laugh. What does this mean? He says, Ben Ish Chai says this. Hashem, when he was going to give us the Torah, he gave us 3 major holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. He was going to give us actually every Rosh Chodesh to be just as big of a holiday. Every Rosh Chodesh. And then the men went and they served the golden calf. The men only served the golden calf, not the women. Hashem said, you know what? I'm taking the Rosh Chodesh away from the men, but the women get to keep it. That's why Rosh Chodesh is a special holiday for the women. Hayita lerosh pina. The women became Rosh Chodeshim. Rosh Chodesh is for the women. The women get the last laugh. So sometimes, as the Ben Ish Chai explained, sometimes the men feel we're in the spotlight. You hear our voices more in the Beit Knesset. You see pictures of the rabbis flying around, which is great. But the women are the people that the men are standing on their shoulders. We're standing on the women's shoulders. This comes in the DNA that is passed to us from our Jewish moms. It's a physical DNA, which makes us Jewish, and it's a spiritual superpower of Mesirut Nefesh. There's a great story, it's a true story, they say, about the Bluzhiner Rebbe. The Bluzhiner Rebbe was in the Holocaust. He was in a ghetto. So what they did was, they locked all these tens of thousands of people inside the ghetto, tens of thousands of Jews, and they basically fed them crumbs of bread and water, nothing. So the Bluzhiner Rebbe was the leader of this area. He decided, it's almost Pesach, it's almost Passover, we're going to request from the lieutenant, from the Nazi lieutenant, I'm going to put a request for some flour so I can make matzah for Passover. The people around him said, you're out of your mind. It's a suicide request. They're not going to give you matzah, they're going to kill you instead. He said, it's almost Passover. I want to have matzah for Pesach. It can't hurt me to try and ask. So he went over to the lieutenant of the ghetto, and he said, I would like, if you can, please request a little bit of flour so I can make matzah for Pesach. The lieutenant responded and said, I'll pass the request up to Berlin. on condition that anyone who's interested in having this matzah has to sign their name on the ledger. Immediately, anyone who wanted to do it backed off quickly. There were only 5 people who signed, including this Rebbe. They signed the paper. Now it's a couple of days before Passover. This guy comes back. He says, guess what? Berlin approved the request. Believe it or not, Berlin approved the request, and they're sending a little bit of flour, just enough to make 1 matzah for each of the people who signed, which means 5 matzot. Enough flour for 5 matzot. Immediately, you can imagine there's tens of thousands of Jews in this place. There's no jobs or anything. They're just sitting there. They're hoarded like cattle. They start swarming the rabbi, asking him, what are you going to do with these 5 matzot? How do you divide them? Maybe you and the top 4 rabbis in the ghetto should eat it and do the obligation of matzah. Maybe you should slice each matzah in half and have 8 people do it. And who do these 8 people are? Should make a lottery? Definitely the women shouldn't do it. Definitely the children shouldn't do it. Maybe the rabbis should do it. And they're discussing what do they do with this 5 matzah. A woman comes over to the rabbi that he doesn't know her. And she sits in front of everyone. And she says, Rabbi, I protest. I lost my husband already in this war, and I lost my children. I have 2 kids with me here, a niece and a nephew. I look after them. You know what matzah is already. All you guys know what matzah is already. These kids will never know what matzah is. How do you even know how long you're going to live? Who cares about you? If you survive the war, I'm sure you'll do matzot when you finish this war. But these children are going to grow up and not know what matzah is. Forget about the men. Give my niece and a nephew a crumb of your matzah and tell them this is Passover matzah. Maybe they'll survive the war and they'll keep this thing going forward. This woman's name was Brunya. Rabbi said, you know what? She's right. She's right. He cracked off pieces of his matzah. He gave one to her nephew and one to her niece. This is Passover matzah. If you survive the war, you keep doing this for the rest of your life. She's right. He survived the war. He lost his entire family, this rabbi. He survived the war. He finds his way now back in America. And someone comes to him and says, Rabbi, you lost your entire family. You should probably get remarried and try to rebuild. You're older now. But there's tons of other people that lost people. Okay. There's a woman who's also a Holocaust survivor. She was actually in the same ghetto as you were. Her name is Brunya. I'll take her. Immediately. If she wants to marry me, I will marry her right now. But do you know anything? I don't know anything about her, but all I know is she's a Jewish mom. They got married, and that nephew and that niece that he gave his matzah to became his children. This is a Jewish mom. This is the superpower that's inside of our DNA, inside of the DNA of our women. They'll stand up when they have to, they'll stamp their foot down when they have to, and they'll keep this thing going forward. It's a very special superpower. So when they say Mother's Day, we don't know how long the non-Jews are going to keep Mother's Day for. Let's just call a spade a spade. We don't know how long Mother's Day, how many more, would you be surprised if next year Mother's Day was canceled? Honestly. Would you be surprised? No. I would not be surprised. I can hear it now. What's so special about moms? I have feelings too, and I'm not. But you came from a mom. Everyone came from a mom. Doesn't matter. They can tear that down. But at least for Jewish people, Mother's Day is a day that we can embrace, because we wouldn't be here without the moms physically, of course, and spiritually. We're heading up to Shavuot. Do we have to look further than Ruth? Ruth from Megillat, Ruth from Shavuot. And Shavuot, many people read Ruth. The Ashkenazim, a lot of Ashkenazim, they read it actually in the shul. We don't read it in the shul, but we have a tikkun that we read. The tikkun has Ruth in it, the entire Ruth. So we all learn it. Everyone should read the story of Ruth on Shavuot. No matter English, Hebrew, doesn't matter. Read the story of Ruth. Now, why do we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot? There's a few reasons they give. Number one, it was the harvesting season, and so was Shavuot. Number two, David HaMelech, the Gemara says, Tosafot says, David HaMelech was born and died on Shavuot. Shavuot, that was also a Shabbat, which can't happen these days with our calendar, but those days it was possible. So David HaMelech was born and died on Shavuot. David HaMelech came from poor little convert Ruth. You read the backstory of David HaMelech and Shavuot. And what do we read about? Ruth was a princess. She was a non-Jewish princess. She came from the tribe of Moab, which was the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Lot. If you go back, remember the story of Abraham and Lot. Way back in the beginning of the Torah, Abraham and his nephew Lot are there, and their shepherds start fighting with each other. And Abraham says, I can't deal with it anymore. Lot, I'll go this way, you go that way. Very famous words. The says, Im yamina ve'asmi'ina, or you go left, I go right, I'll go left. I don't care which way you turn. You pick a way, I'll go the other way. And Lot says to Abraham, fine, you got it. I'll go there. Lot goes to Sodom. His wife gets killed in Sodom. His life gets ruined because of that choice to leave Abraham Avinu, Lot. He has 2 kids, Ammon and Moab, and Ruth comes from Moab. Now Ruth finally made tikkun and made up for the big mistake of her great-great-great-grandpa, Lot. Because Ruth was a non-Jewish princess. And her sister Orpah, they married 2 Jewish boys. Both of these guys died, and the father of these boys died as well. So Naomi, they're living in the non-Jewish land. Now her Jewish mother-in-law, she has 2 daughter-in-laws who are both non-Jewish, and Naomi says to herself, I got nothing left here. I lost my husband, I lost my kids, I'm going back to the Jewish people. I left here a very important woman. I'm broken. There's nothing left in my life. Not a penny to her name. No children left. Only 2 daughter-in-laws who are non-Jewish. Naomi says, I'm going home. And these 2 daughter-in-laws follow her. And Naomi tells them, go home. Go back to the palace. Your father is your princesses. You can have anything you want in this world. Why would you want to be Jewish? And Orpah turns around and goes back. Who was Orpah's son, by the way? When she went back, she got married again, Orpah. Call her married. She was a very interesting lady. Orpah was the mother of Goliath. And Ruth was the great-great-grandmother of David. And then those 2 went head-to-head later on. Interesting cousins. So Ruth says to Naomi, I'm not going back to my father. I don't care that I was a princess. Very famous verse from Megillat Ruth. Everyone should read the Megillah this Shavuot. Where you go, I go. Where you sleep, I sleep. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I die. Ruth, Mesirut Nefesh. This is Mesirut Nefesh. I give up everything in my life because I want to be a part of this nation and keep this thing going forward. Yes, she lost her husband, but she has another shot. We're going to do it again. And then eventually she followed Ruth. And if you know the story of Ruth, she had a child who had David HaMelech. David HaMelech is Mashiach. David HaMelech, he said, Hay v'kayam would not exist if not for Ruth. It shows you the power of the DNA of our moms. This is what it's all about. We're reading this in Shavuot. So this is a superpower. So when we say Happy Mother's Day to a Jewish mom, we really mean it. If not for our Jewish moms, we would be 0. I can tell you, as the Baal Kodei, I read the Torah here, so I teach a lot of boys for Bar Mitzvah lessons, and a lot of the boys I teach are public school kids, a lot. And these kids, they open up and they start talking on their own, and one after another. I had one boy, he told me, he said, I go to public school, my parents don't send me with a sandwich to school for lunch, and I have to go and eat at the cafeteria in school. But you know what? I try so hard every day not to eat the meat. At least I should eat the dairy in the school. This boy's 12 years old. And I come home and I tell my wife, look at this boy. He goes to public school. He has a cafeteria there. Who cares? Just eat what your friends are eating. What is inside of him that's making him not eat the meat at the cafeteria? He should be the only kid at the table eating the salad or the cheese? Because it's in his DNA. Where did he get that from? He got it from his mom. And here's the sad part. If his mom only knew that she's the source of this power. If she wanted to send him to a real Jewish school, she can do it. no matter what the challenge is. She's the source of this power. He's exercising his power. She needs to tap into hers. This is something that has kept our nation afloat for thousands of years. We don't take no for an answer. I'll tell you one final story that's an amazing story, and it shows you how real this superpower is. This story is told by Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, and it happened to him personally. The story happened to him personally. He was a young guy. He was a learned guy. He was a young guy, not married. And someone asked him, you know, there's a community, small community in Japan, Jewish community in Japan. Would you go there and lead their Passover Seder for them? So he goes to Japan. He said there were around 200 people at the Passover Seder. It was very nice. He was shocked how many Jewish people were there. Not that religious, but that's okay. After the Seder, it was too close to Shabbat. Pesach ended too close to Shabbat, so he decided to stay for Shabbat in Japan. And as the custom is, between the weeks of Pesach and Shavuot, we learn Pirkei Avot, right? So on Shabbat, after Pesach, 3 weeks before Shavuot, he's teaching in the shul in Japan, much less, 20 people or so in the shul, Pirkei Avot, chapter 1 Pirkei Avot. And he says, this one lady, obviously very Japanese, she has all the features of a Japanese woman, she's asking him fantastic questions. Like she knows what she's talking about. This lady knows a lot. He was like shocked. He's answering her questions, and afterwards she comes over to him and she says, thank you so much for the shiur, I loved it. I would be honored if you'd come to my house for lunch. He says to her, listen, I don't want to insult you. Please don't take this the wrong way. I'm a religious Orthodox. We have kosher standards. Don't be insulted. I appreciate the offer, but I have to eat my own food. We have very laws. It's too complicated to enter these laws. She's like, what laws are you talking about? Chalav Yisrael? Chat Yisrael? Yashan? What are you talking about? I have all of it in my house. My house is it's a yeshiva in my house. He's like, what? Really? He's like, yeah. She's like, I even milk the cows myself. Everything is Chalav Yisrael. Are you serious? Yeah. Okay. He goes to her house for Shabbat. He goes to her house, he walks in the door. Sitting at the table is her husband with a beard and payas, and 2 Japanese kids with payas, kippas, the whole works. He's like shocked. How in the world did this come about? So he asks her, he said, I have to ask. You knew I would ask this question. What's the story? You've got to give me the backstory. So she tells him, you know, my husband was not religious at all. He was an unaffiliated Jew. And he traveled abroad, and he was offered a teaching job in Japan. He took a teaching job, not religious. I met him, we fell in love, we got married. And then sometime after the wedding, I started asking questions about his heritage, about his culture, and he didn't have any answers for me. So I told him, aren't you interested in learning more about where you come from? He said, yeah, maybe. I kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and the more I learned about Judaism, the more I loved it. Eventually I decided I want to become Jewish. So he said there was a reform, she says there was a reform rabbi visiting Japan, and she said, convert me, I want to be Jewish. So he converted her. She kept learning more and more Torah. She says, hang on, I want to get a conservative conversion. Next time there was a conservative rabbi, true story, she got a conservative conversion. And then she learned more and more, and they started growing. And she says, that's it, we're going all the way. We're going all the way. We're flying to California, and we're getting a real Orthodox conversion, and we're raising our family completely Jewish. And that's what we did. And here's the result, she tells him. She says, test my kids. Ask them, Gemara, Humash, test them. He tested them. They knew their stuff. He was shocked. He says to her, I can't believe it. He's like, you gave up everything. You're like a real life Ruth, he tells her. Rus, he probably said. Yes. He goes home. He was thinking about this. He decided to just write down the story, just for his own record, so he doesn't forget the details. And he moves on his way. Now he gets married. 10, 15 years pass. His father had a Yiddish newspaper that they sent out in Brooklyn to the Yiddish-speaking people. His father said to him, listen, I had a guy who was writing a column every week before Shabbat on the Pirashah. Can you take over and every week write a Pirashah column? He said, okay. So every week he'd write a Pirashah column. Now, months into it, it's right after Shavuot. It was a Shavuot that ended on like a Thursday. So now it's Shabbat right away. He had nothing prepared for this column, and his father says, hey, the newspaper is due. We got to send it out. He says, I got nothing. He says, you got to give me something for the newspaper. He says, you know what? Shavuot, Ruth. This is a story that happened to me 15 years ago. Interesting story. I met a real life Ruth. Let's put this story in the column. So he puts it in the column. What happens is nothing. A few years later, he finds himself in California, Rabbi Jacobson, in Agora Hills. And he goes to this rabbi's house, his friend, and the rabbi says, you know, I've been meaning to tell you thank you, but I forgot. Thank me for what? He says, your column that you write every week, it's a great column. I always have people at my table, and they're not always religious, and I just read in your column because it's something that works for everyone. I get it, I pull the paper out, I don't read it beforehand even, I just read it at the table, and everyone seems to like it. Well, one time on Shabbat, I had a couple that were really upset because they were one of them was converted to Judaism, and she felt like she wasn't welcome. And she felt like she was excited to join Judaism, and she felt that she'd be embraced. She's different than everyone else. And she felt like left out of the picture, and she was telling me, like, I'm so disappointed. Nobody seems to appreciate me. And he takes out the paper. He's like, you know, I have the paper that I always read. Maybe there's something in the paper today that'll make you feel better. And he takes out the paper, and now is the week he wrote the story about the Ruth, about his Ruth he met in Japan. So the rabbi takes out the paper. He says, I'm going to read you this section from this rabbi. He never fails. He's always good. He starts reading it. The lady starts crying. He says, what are you crying about? She says, that's me. I just moved here from Japan. I was so excited. I thought I'd be embraced. People will look at me and appreciate everything I gave up. And I come here, my kids have slanted eyes, and some people make fun of them in school. And I'm like, what's going on here with these people? Why don't they appreciate me? He says, look, someone appreciates you. Someone appreciates you. And he said, I want to thank you. The rabbi tells Rabbi Jacobson, I want to thank you for giving her a new life. These superpowers are existent today. It's in our DNA. Thousands of years have passed. Not one iota has diminished from our abilities. It's passed on from mother to daughter, from mother to son, and it's a team that never ends. So on a day like today, on Mother's Day, it's a goyish day, it's a goyish day. But you know what? There's no better day for Jewish people to embrace and say thank you to the moms for the physical Jewishness and for the spiritual Jewishness. Thank you for coming, everyone.